Hello, this is John Majori with Majori on Bowie. And this is the Majori on Bowie YouTube channel, where I have a new interview every week that has something to do with David Bowie. And for daily content, visit the blog, www.majorionbowie.com, where I post something new every day that almost always has something to do with David Bowie. And today, I'm very excited to have two very special guests, Alex S. Johnson and Alea Celeste Williams, aka Pickles, and I will refer to her as Pickles for the duration of this interview, from Nocturnicorn Books, which is going to be publishing, it might be out by the time you see this, Moondust Will Cover You, a literary tribute to David Bowie, which we'll be discussing shortly. Nocturnicorn specializes in speculative fiction, including horror, cyberpunk, and bizarro, and has published several literary anthologies, including tributes to William S. Burroughs and Bauhaus. In fact, their flagship series, The Junk Merchants, a literary tribute to William S. Burroughs, led directly to their Bauhaus anthology, thanks in part to David J. himself, who contributed an original poem and later allowed them to reprint the lyrics to The Day David Bowie Died. That through line, Burroughs, Bowie, the Beats, runs through much of their work. Alex S. Johnson is the author. He's an author, an editor, and publisher. Pickles is a poet, and I'm told something of a Nietzsche expert, which is certainly very relevant to a deep reading of David Bowie's lyrics. One thing that makes Nocturnicorn Books stand out is the participation of rock stars themselves, contributing original work to their anthologies. So Alex and Pickles, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much, John.
Thank you for having us. I was going to say, I don't know if I'm a Nietzsche expert, but I do like Nietzsche.
Well, I'm going to ask you a couple questions.
I'll do my best.
Well, let me start by asking about the Bowie anthology, Moondust Will Cover You, a literary tribute to Bowie. What does that mean? Tell us about the book.
Okay, well, it actually started out in 2017. I really love the song "Hello Space Boy." I felt it was sort of like a progression of the themes of not only space oddity but also he seemed to be revisiting sort of his genderqueer kind of playfulness for a new generation. And it seemed like he was reassuring, some young up and coming people who are maybe, transgender or gay or whatever, that it's okay, that's okay to be curious. It's okay to be young. It's okay to not have a fixed idea of what your gender is or what your sexual orientation is, or, any combination, because it's very complex sort of set of axes that involve sex, gender, and sexual orientation. And I began by actually, I had a friend named Chris Thompson in Guelph, British Columbia, who did two uh, two Bowie tributes. And I contributed a number of works because, as soon as he put out call for submissions, I was just like, I got to be all over that, right? And then I kept reading. I kept, checking out books from the library. Also, I'm a active music journalist. I've been a music journalist, published music journalist, including, you know, being a staff writer for Metal Maniacs, Zero Tolerance Magazine, Brave Words and Bloody Knuckles, Blue Blood Magazine, et cetera, Rex Experience Hendrix. And so I've written and published hundreds of articles and interviews, and so I've always been really, really excited about that nexus of the the Warhol factory
Yeah.
period, the and then the connection with Burroughs, uh, Nico, who was an actress in La Dolce Vita by Federico Fellini, as well as being sort of brought on board much to the dissatisfaction of Lewis Reed, as the front woman for the Velvet Underground, she did not fit at all, excuse me. But at the same time, there were all these currents, and including like the decadence period in French literature, Dada and surrealism, and German expressionism, and these avant-garde, art school movements. And so all of these elements combined to sort of volatilize my renewed interest in going back to Bowie and in 2017. And so I started writing this book called Moon Dust Will Cover You, a literary tribute to David Bowie. And at the time, it was just me.
Yeah.
Subsequently, when we published about, I've lost track of how many literary tributes. We started out with publishing a literary tribute to Leonard Cohen called Anthem, and then that progressed to doing the first Burroughs tribute. We published a literary tribute to Black Sabbath. Then we've done, and we have several other anthologies in the works that are literary tributes to various artists and authors, including Clive Barker. And I'm just really fascinated with that whole period, particularly Berlin, the Berlin
Yeah.
era, um, larger low heroes, that era. So none of these strands can you really extricate. When I realized that we had a sort of a rich resource base of people around the world absolutely love Bowie or have the same kind of obsessions, I started reaching out to people that I knew would be down for down for the cause. And I reached out to people who were part of the Bowie circle or part of, I reached out to Angie Bowie. She said, good luck with that project, but I don't really talk about David, right? I reached out to David J in LA, and he just like he turned around and he's like, will this do? Will this do? And I'm like, wait a minute, holy, whatever, holy Starman, did David J. Haskins, the man who wrote Bela Lugosi's Dead, just write me an exclusive original piece to publish in my anthology just because he was into it?
Yeah.
And apparently so, apparently that happened. I mean, it was just crazy. So I've approached everybody. I'm friends with Bibi Hansen, and who's my cousin, right? Which is another wild thing, right? Bibi Hansen, and I'm cousins with Bibi and Beck. All the connections come back to, I think, beat literature and William S. Burroughs.
This is a super basic question.
Sure.
What is a literary tribute?
Okay, literary tribute, to answer, that's a fine question, John. A literary tribute is when you have writers, I guess, and the most basic construction of that is
Yeah.
you have writers, whether they're writers of lyrics, they're writers of anecdotes, they're writers like Hannah Breschard, for
Yeah.
example. They're writers of, or Denise George. We have Denise George in this anthology. So the writers, people who write, words and in various forms. Short story writers, dark fiction writers, cyberpunk writers, science fiction writers, you name it, all all addressing a single subject, an artist, whether it's Black Sabbath, it's William S. Burroughs, it's Bauhaus. They're participating in the universe of themes and tropes that these songs evoke, or they're directly writing covers exactly. You could say that some of these are sort of like cover songs. So
Yeah.
for
So
example,
they're contributing different types of writing. It's not all.
yes, exactly. And
Yes. Okay.
so, for example, Carrie Lee Chrome, who is the founder of the Runaways, contributed an original piece for the Bauhaus anthology called North of No North, which could be which could be a song, as she's very well known for her famous songs, like California Paradise and Secrets and Waiting for the Night, right? So that could be either, right? It's a poem or it's a song. It's a new
Yeah.
Bauhaus song. And then, for example, the really famous, um, dark fiction writer Caitlin R. Kiernan, the two-time winner of the World Fantasy and Bram Stoker Awards, and she wrote a story for the Bowie book, which was directly based on the Outside um, album, and she even used the cut up method to she took the original story, she cut it into pieces, put it in a hat, literally, right?
Yeah.
And took the pieces out of the hat, and then she pasted them on a new, fresh sheets of paper, and was fine. I mean, Caitlin is famous for saying she doesn't believe in plot. And so that's a perfect example of an artist in one medium, right? Dark fiction, speculative fiction, being inspired by an artist in another medium, music, for example,
Yeah.
and then giving their take and their spin on that inspiration.
So two of the contributors to this anthology, you mentioned Hannah Burchard, and
Yeah.
you interviewed Tony Zanetta, and
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
yeah, I wanted to mention them because they've been guests on my show. And
I
tell us about what did Hannah write, and what was Tony really saying to you?
Okay, well, so those are two questions. Hannah wrote about in her very ebullient and wonderfully optimistic style about, how wonderful it is to be the space cadet and bringing together, this world community of Bowie fans, and I love Hannah so much, and I was telling her about our contributors, and I was saying, well, this person's a legend, and that person's a legend. She said, you were a legend. And I was like, I like what we're saying here, Hannah, because she really is a true legend. And she has, literally, Bowie used her voice
Yeah.
in a song, right? So,
Yeah.
so I think it's also the superstar ethos, right? Going back to Warhol, we can all be, we can be heroes,
Yeah.
right? Just for one day. Tony is, I love this man. I love this man.
Yeah.
I know you do too. Everybody
Yeah.
does, right? He's so kind and he's so
Yeah.
generous. And he spent as much time with me as I needed. He answered all of my questions, and then he really kind of I love his wit and his kind of unassuming style. He doesn't he for a guy who sort of was partially responsible for crafting Ziggy Stardust, the persona. He's
Yeah.
low key. It's like
Yeah.
it just I think I feel like these people are just fellow fans.
Yeah. Wow. If somebody wants to get this book, how do they get it? Where can they get it?
They will be able to purchase it. It's going to come out next. We're going to put it out in two installments because we have one of our contributors um, taking on the occult aspect of Bowie's work and his whole life. Really had that strong interest in the occult.
Yeah.
Our friend Sharon LaVey, as in Anton LaVey, right? And yeah, she is the
Well, what is her relationship to Anton LaVey? And just again, if somebody doesn't know, who is Anton LaVey?
okay. Anton LaVey was the founder of the Church of Satan.
Yeah.
He was one of the most influential people of the 20th century and of our time. Extremely controversial, former crime photographer in Kearney, and he transformed this. He created this in the year 1966, where I was born. Oh my God! On October 31st, I was born on October 31st, 1966, right? And the year and that which is a satanic high holiday, you know. And so he founded the Church of Satan. I really think it's kind of he's sort of like the P.T. Barnum of Satanism. You know, he really
Yeah.
and he was an absolute genius at sort of crafting this persona and this and kind of playing around with these archetypal themes. Oh my God, a black mass with nudity and sex, you know, oh my gosh. And Stanton LaVey was his, I believe, his grandson. I believe it's his grandson. He's no longer with us, unfortunately. So his grandson, Stanton LaVey, was married to Sharon LaVey, and so so she is like the official head of the. I mean, there's all kinds of you know, people who could say, "Oh, that's a leader in the Satanic Church," but she is, as far as I'm concerned, she is the leader of the Church of Satan, and so that's her relationship. She was married to Stanton LaVey.
Yeah. And so she wrote for this volume about Bowie and the occult, which
Yeah,
Bowie had a profound interest in the occult.
right.
And that, I mean, to me, I'm just coming to know some of what Nocturnicorn does, but it seems like
Yeah,
there's a thread there.
yeah. There's a thread. Um, there's a number of different threads. Actually, I was turned on to Sharon, and I was introduced to Sharon by our mutual friend of me and Pickles and a number of other, you know, it's a community. Her name is Nicole H6 and SIXX. If that sounds familiar, you may have heard of a little band called Motley Crue.
Yeah.
She is the daughter of Nikki Six, and she's incredibly talented. I mean, on her own of her course, she's a filmmaker, she's an actress, she's a comics writer, she's a dark fiction writer, she's a poet, and she's an animal rights activist, a super nice person. So she introduced me to Sharon
Well,
LaVey, just the
um,
same way.
so let me, we touched on
Yeah,
the occult. Um,
right.
there's other aspects of uh, subject matter that Bowie addressed that seem to share other threads with some of the other types of books that come out from Nocturnicorn. For instance, horror. Um,
Yes,
there are horror elements in albums like One Outside,
right.
and speculative storytelling, right? So uh, Bowie does that with an album like Diamond Dogs.
Exactly.
Yeah. So um, uh, um, to a very casual fan of Bowie who might just know something like Let's Dance or the Greatest Hits,
Yeah.
can you sort of touch on how he wove some of these other maybe darker elements into some of his music and his songwriting?
Okay, yes. There are songs. I mean, if you really dissect a song like doo 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 doo, what's that song? Doo 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 doo, station to station,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Um, that is an incredibly effing sinister song.
Yeah.
Really get into it. It's incredibly dark, you know, and the reference to white stains, that's Crowley, right? The great beast
If you
666,
thought
right?
Anton LaVey was bad, Aleister Crowley.
Aleister Crowley, right? Aleister Crowley was, you know, and so there is a direct connection between a lot of these. It's hard to sort of extract the occultism from the writers
Yeah.
because a lot of them are also into, you know, things like black magic, notoriously David J. Haskins. And he was turned on to Burroughs. Well, actually, he was a self-described Burroughs obsessive, and he was reading. We also have we're one of our contributors is V. Vale of Research Publications, right? So he was reading David J. David J. Haskins, you know, Bauhaus, you know, I'm not worthy. He was reading this book by one of the research publications things, on industrial culture, right? and it was an interview with the late Jen P. Orich. And Jen was talking about sigil magic, right? Sigil magic, which is a kind of comes out of chaos magic, and it's a whole practice. And so he was like, aha, well, I'm going to use sigil magic to contact William S. Burroughs because David is notoriously obsessed with with Uncle Bill. And then that led to a kind of a crazy situation. Okay, so he's from this industrial town called Northampton, right, in England, right?
Yeah.
And so David says that he was very, as he writes about in in this book, Who Killed Mr. Moonlight? He talks about how he was nearly derailed and went off kind of off the rails because of all these crazy people like Alan Moore and Genesis P. Orridge. So there's this very, very sinister, dark thread that connects a lot of the energy in David Bowie songs is because the subliminal hints of like really, really dark stuff, And I'm not really answering your question. I'm sorry, I'm neurodivergent AF. So you're never going to get a straight, cogent answer, but you might have an odyssey of mycelial connections, which are even more interesting.
Bowie fans are good with that.
Yes, exactly. Bowie fans are good with that. So I just roll with it. I think it's one energy. It's one energy. It's creative energy. It's dark energy. It's also light energy. It's energy. It's force. It's the
So we've met, so far in this conversation, we've mentioned William S. Burroughs, Aleister Crowley,
yes,
and some of the other influences on Bowie's songwriting.
yeah.
Pickles, I was interested in your interest in Friedrich Nietzsche, and and I wanted to ask you, Bowie mentions some of his concepts in songs like the Supermen or Oh You Pretty Things.
Yeah.
And the Nietzsche came up with the concept of the Supermen, right? And what does that mean, and how did it influence Bowie? What did Bowie mean?
Well, yeah, so the Superman is the Ubermensch, and it can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, but and I think to Bowie, I think it stood for a person coming into their own power, self-actualization. I think becoming like overcoming your own obstacles, defining your own beliefs, your own morals, ethics, and but yeah, so well, the way I was introduced to Nietzsche was, well, I kind of just got into it because of my interest in Jim Morrison and the Doors, but I also had been a fan of Bowie long, kind of before I discovered Nietzsche, but it was kind of when I started reading Nietzsche, I realized that Bowie's music was talking about it. And like the song "Oh You Pretty Things" was one of my favorite songs growing up. I had discovered Bowie when I was really young. I was born in '85, and I think I was about 10 when I discovered Bowie. And I started listening to Hunky Dory, which I know is probably one of his most well-known albums, but to this day, I think it might still be one of my favorites. And but the "Oh You Pretty Things," talking about the way, like, you got to make way for the homo superior idea, is kind of just, or the way that he was talking about like the children that you spit on as they try to change their world. I feel like that really hits with a lot of, I think it hits a lot of different generations, because I think a lot of people remember what it's like to be young and to be kind of shocked at what the world can throw at you, and have to grow up and discover who you are, and which I think is probably one reason why Bowie reaches so many people. I don't know if that music, it really reached into my soul and helped me growing up during all kinds of different times of my life. And I think he does that for a lot of people. And Nietzsche really speaks to me too. And it is kind of hard to understand. And like I said, I'm definitely not an expert, but I do love Nietzsche, and I felt very inspired by Bowie and Nietzsche. And you can see in Bowie's poetry that he takes a lot of ideas from Nietzsche and Burroughs, definitely, for sure.
So let me just ask you one last question on that.
Okay.
Do you think Bowie's reading of Nietzsche is consistent with your understanding of what Nietzsche intended?
That's a very good question. I'm really not sure how to answer that. I think so, to me, but it's kind of, yeah, that's kind of a really broad question, because he does do, Bowie has done a lot of different things. So I guess I would probably leave that question to somebody who's maybe got a little more expertise than me, but I would think so personally.
Yeah. So that, we've talked about Bowie's influence from a philosopher, from literature, from the occult and religion. And, if we look beyond that, Bowie is also influenced by visual artists and certain types of images. Nocturnicorn publishes horror, and Bowie borrowed concepts from horror, like the distorted human body, when, for instance, he mentions in Joe the Lion being nailed to his car, or some of the images from the video. This volume that we're talking about, Moon Dust Will Cover You, is from a song from One Outside. A video from that period shows the human body as artistic material, right? So in the Heart's Filthy Lesson video, Bowie is using bodies like he would be using clay or canvas, and it's disturbing images. But you could, you mentioned you have an anthology on Clive Barker. It's almost like he came up with these ideas that Bowie was sort of tapping into.
Yes.
So what do you think he was up to? I'm throwing this out to both of you. What was Bowie up to?
Well, that's Pickles. You want to tackle that one?
Okay. I will try. I think he was doing a lot with his art, where he wanted to bring together a lot. It seems like a lot of different styles, and like you said, a lot of different influences. Definitely, I would say Clive Barker had to have influenced Bowie a lot. And yet I don't know a ton about the Joe the Lion, but I know that wasn't it kind of controversial when he put that on his car? It was like I know it had to do with that, with Chris Burden. Yeah, and I know that it was like a performance art thing that he did, right? Is that right?
That's exactly right. Chris Burden is a performance artist who was literally nailed to a car as art.
Okay. Wow. Yeah.
He was actually nailed to a car.
It's wild. Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah, they did some really, really interesting things, and I think he was trying to do a lot to I don't know how to answer this very well, but I feel like he was exploring his soul a lot, if that makes sense. Alex might answer this better than I could. Thank you for giving me a chance to try, though.
Alex, before you take a stab at that, pun intended, let me just sort of expand a little bit. Bowie also used images of human, non-human hybrids.
Yeah.
Sure.
So famously, like on the cover of Diamond Dogs, he's half
Right.
human, half dog. But going back to One Outside, there's the line from Ramona A. Stone about 8 men with metal parts,
Yeah.
right? Where the Minotaur is a character, and the Minotaur is part animal and part human.
Right.
And
Yeah.
he had Gallan Dorsey dress up as a horsewoman, or one of his last videos for Black Star, hell, right? And again, like he's doing something with the human body, and what it's
Right.
sort of the same question. It's like, what kind of there's an emotional sort of primal resonance that taps
Sure.
into. What do you think that is?
Wow. And well, I immediately think of artists like Monterey, artists like Marcel Duchamp,
Yeah,
who was very, very strong influences on David. Particularly there was the last piece that Duchamp did was this incredibly disturbing sort of this little it's almost like a forbidden the forbidden door, where he has this hole that was cut in a plank of wood. You look inside and there's this nude body, this woman's nude body is kind of splayed out in a very kind of explicit way, and you're not sure whether it's a murder scene or
yeah,
not, and I think that okay, one of the biggest inspirations and influences on the Dada and Surrealist movement was, well, among other people, Baudelaire. Baudelaire wrote about famously the grotesque, about murder victims as kind of erotic objects, about lesbianism, about suicide. He wrote a poem literally called Litanies of Satan, right? And and a lot of the grotesque imagery of Baudelaire, of Rimbaud, um, and also the inspiration that came from the sort of shocking, taboo, transgressive writings of Marquis de Sade, right?
yeah,
Of Outremont, of Malderour, of Georges Bataille. All these artists and authors had a profound, who wrote the story of the eye, right? If you've ever read that thing, it will peel your brain back, right? And so David was,
well, when was it? Do you know when that approximately was written?
I think it was about 1925 or something.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And Georges Bataille was, of course, an expert on Nietzsche. So also I wanted to address on that question about do you ask Pickles, um, d- um, did did she think that Bowie's interpretation of Nietzsche was in accord with his was what he intent what Nietzsche intended. And I
Yeah.
would say that Nietzsche was a proto deconstructionist.
Uh-huh.
So my take on Nietzsche was that he he a long before he was one of the biggest inspirations for Jacques Derrida. Um, I don't think you can read Nietzsche and say, oh, he meant this or that. He meant, or the other thing. I think he was deliberately ironic in many respects. And some of the things that have courted a lot of controversies for especially in today's political climate, things that might be considered extremely misogynistic, for example, is truth a woman? Which he asked that question sort of infamously. Well, I don't think it's that misogynistic. I think he's sort of baiting the reader, going with in the idiom of the time, in the very, I guess, sexist idiom of the time. But he was genuinely a lonely bachelor, and he was in love with this woman who absolutely wanted nothing to do with him except to put him in the friend zone, right? So poor Nietzsche, right? And then he died insane in a mental hospital of syphilis, right? And he contracted from a whore, which he saw one time. So poor guy. that was around the world in 60 seconds. So I'm not sure if I answered that question, but
Yeah. Well, let me sort of tie it back.
Yeah.
The again, we're touching on a lot of different influences, and I noticed you mentioned the Marquis de Sade,
yeah,
and one of the things that stands out to me is, I mean, I certainly see the through line. I
yeah,
think the reason I mentioned him is that I think he's the earliest figure that you mentioned, right?
yes,
He was born in the 18th century. I'm
yes,
less familiar with when his most famous writings were they the late 18th or the early 19th century, but a long time ago. And there's
Right.
definitely a through line,
Right.
into the 20th century, and then right up to the video for the Heart's Filthy Lesson, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so this horror, the grotesque, the conflation between, is it a dead body or is it an erotic image, right?
Exactly.
What is the appeal? I mean, this is some dark stuff, but it's been around for a very, very long time, and you've got artists and philosophers sort of tapping into it. What is it?
I have the perfect example for you. Now, one of our main, I guess, major contributing authors is so if you have a list of the most famous and best-selling horror authors, you have Stephen King, Clive Barker, Peter Straub is dead, Harlan Ellison is dead. One of those is Poppy Z. Brite. Poppy Z. Brite, now known as Billy Martin, is a transgender gay man who came to wild success and rock star status in the 90s. Then she, Poppy Z. Brite, in her Purple Prose newsletter in 1997, after Burroughs had died, and this was included in an issue of Purple Prose newsletter, which was facing my interview with her friend and collaborator, Krista Faust. And Poppy wrote one of the most infamous transgressive pieces ever published, and it's called R.I.P., in which Poppy fantasized about having sex with Burroughs' corpse. Right? And I was in the ground floor. I was in ground zero for that incredibly infamous and still infamous publication. Uh, Billy Martin is still best known for his novel, 1996 novel called Exquisite Corpse. The name comes from the Dada Surrealist game, but it also comes from the song by Bauhaus, which was based on that game.
Yeah.
And the plot of Exquisite Corpse is basically two serial killers. One was based on Jeffrey Dahmer. The other was based on the British civil servant Dennis Nielsen, who were both subjects of true crime books by Brian Masters in England. And basically, what would happen if Jeffrey Dahmer met Dennis Nielsen and they fell in love? And then they formed this emotional bond around this young Asian boy that they're basically grooming to be tortured and murdered and eaten. And it's a love story. Yeah.
So, that you mentioned this, and I actually want to go back to the question I asked, and but to also sort of give you the opportunity to mention some of the other books or anthologies that Nocturna Porn has published, because we've been sort of focusing on this one, and you've mentioned some of the others, but there's definitely a draw. If just the way you describe that story, it sounds that it should not be compelling. It sounds like it should be repelling. Yeah, but it's like it has the opposite effect. There's definitely an audience. Your output, the books that you published, people are reading them, right? You mentioned prominent authors who have a fan base.
Yes.
What's the appeal? There's a primal interest that draws us closer to what should be pushing us away.
You bring me closer to God, right?
Yeah, Nine Inch Nails.
9 Inch Nails.
Yeah.
Um, so it's the same thing. I'm primarily a music journalist. I'm primarily a heavy metal journalist. And for me, I can't really distinguish between my love of horror films,
Yeah.
my love of well, I no longer use any substances, but I used to use, X substances. And I'm an intense guy. I have a lot of appetites. And for me, it all goes together. It sort of fuels like one form fuels another form. But just the intensity for me, the craving for some sort of ultimate satisfaction, even if it's a really, really good example is The Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker, which he transformed into the movie Hellraiser and the whole Hellraiser series. And that addresses the whole. See, we live in this world where, as William Blake described it, we're not getting the entire feed. We're getting very, very limited access to the big picture. Blake famously said, if the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would be seen as it actually is, infinite. And Blake was a huge inspiration for Barker. He's not just a horror author, he's also a very spiritual guy. And I think it's the desire ultimately for the transcendental, the numinous, the divine, which in our very limited capacity with our limited sensory perception, we have intimations of the divine, right? We have intimations of terrifying beauty and
Yeah.
and beyond belief. And I think that we have a certain level of cognitive dissonance as a race because we've been forbidden by societal norms to embrace the really dark side. It's like, what's going to happen to you if you embrace, practices such as BDSM, for example? Nothing bad will happen to you unless it's non-consensual, and that's problematic. But we've been forbidden, as a culture, because of our puritanical heritage, to accept that some of these things are really fun and they will not harm you in any way, shape, or form. They will make your life improved, you know, and some drugs, I think that marijuana is harmless. 420, is great. Mushrooms are great, certain, I don't, but you know, even our access to fun is severely limited. And I think that's why people like Hunter S. Thompson and William S. Burroughs and, bands like Bauhaus, Black Sabbath, Motley Crue, Aerosmith, what have you, are AC/DC are so beloved, right?
Yeah.
It's like we're on the highway to hell, baby. So
Yeah.
instead of saying, oh, that's bad, you know, as Lemmy famously put it, that's the way I like it, baby. I don't want to live forever, but apparently I am, right? Yeah.
It's funny. You're making me think of you mentioned Station to Station earlier, and
Yes.
how that song is on the same album as A Word on a Wing.
Yeah.
Right. So you've got the terror and you've got the dark vision right next to the prayer. And the first thing that you said in answer to the question they asked was, it brings me closer to God.
Yeah.
So I think, how do we go on from there? So I think that's a good place to just about end. You've been great. But I do want to ask the both of you two last questions. The one I asked before, you started to answer, but people are going to want to get this anthology, and how can they get it?
Okay, so it will not be available for another month or so. However, as they're waiting with,
You don't know when people are watching this.
I don't know when people are watching this.
Yeah.
Okay. It will be available at the end of July at the latest.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, they can access our. We have about 20, or well, actually about 30 books, and I'm just going to hit our our stars, our star models. The Junk Merchants, a literary tribute to William S. Burroughs. We have a, a, uh, sword and sorcery anthology called Dreams of Fire and Steel, which has an original story that was Elric of Melniboné's story that was endorsed by none other than Michael Moorcock. That also has an original piece by Byron Roberts of the symphonic black metal band Bal Sagoth. We have Floppy Shoes Apocalypse 2, which has a story by international, I mean, by Ramsey Campbell, who's probably has more honors than any other horror writer. White on White, a literary tribute to Bauhaus, which features Jarbo from Swans, Carrie Lee Crum from who founded the Runaways. Original compositions by Ethan Morales from Spawn Ranch, Black Tape for a Blue Girl. So, and Caitlin R. Kiernan and Poppy Z. Bright wrote an original introduction, an original forward. So we have a number of, and lest I forget, Hand of Doom, and to show the people this incredible book. This is for a charity anthology. It is for to benefit Children of the Night Incorporated. We work with children who've been victims of sex trafficking, and it's an extremely worthy cause. This is all original stories and poems by some of the most acclaimed authors in horror, including John Shirley, who wrote the screenplay to The Crow. So an absolutely original story, all based on Black Sabbath songs.
Yeah.
Paul M. Salmon, who wrote the book Future Noir, the making of Blade Runner, and was the editor of Splatterpunks, the original anthology, which featured everybody from Clive Barker to John Skip to you name it. And so this is an incredibly good cause. We have about 8 Bram Stoker Award-winning authors. We have Lucifer Fulci from Death Rock Supergroup, Penis Flytrap, and Pickles always cracks up when I say Penis Flytrap, and
I do. I have juvenile humor.
black metal band Lords of October, last seen going on tour with Venom Incorporated. So Hand of Doom, it's a great cause.
Yeah.
It'll help children.
It is, yeah.
All right. So here's my final question, which I ask everybody, and it's a silly one, which is, I'm going to ask both of you, so you both have to answer. What is your favorite Bowie song and album?
Oh, wow. Pickles, you want to take that one?
Okay. I do think Hunky Dory is my favorite album. I think, oh my gosh, there's so many good songs. I don't know. Maybe I will go with "Oh You Pretty Things" just because it influenced me so much as a child. Oh gosh, this is a hard question too. Let me can I indulge myself a little bit though? I didn't mention though, I discovered Bowie through Labyrinth.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I was I think maybe 10, 11 years old, and I first saw Bowie on Labyrinth, and I thought he was the most beautiful thing I ever laid eyes upon, and that's where it all started for me. So I know it is a little bit silly, so that's one of my favorites too, is just because it's a childhood favorite.
There's some people that only know him through Labyrinth.
Right, that's true. Yeah. I hope.
All right, Alex,
okay.
you're on the hot seat.
Yeah, for me, it's also Hunky Dory. And it's I have to do this because I used to drive my dad crazy. He's still around. He's about 87 years old, and I would every day I would do this thing, you know. This is Andy Warhol, take one. Warhol, Andy Warhol,
Yeah.
and holes.
Yeah.
Andy Warhol, Andy Warhol. Ha 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 ha. Ding, da, ding, da, da. Yes,
Great.
yes.
Terrific. Alex, Pickles, thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
I'm looking forward to the anthology. Moon Dust will cover you. Very much looking forward to reading it. And thank you so much. This has been really terrific. You've been great.
Thank you so
Let's stay in touch.
Awesome.
Thank you.
It was great to be on your show. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.